And we can get started. My name is Varun Sharma, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of StepSecurity.
Hi, I'm Eromosele Higby and the developer advocate in StepSecurity.
And before we get started, also want to mention that Ashish and I will be presenting in Black Hat in August. And so if you're planning to attend, please drop by our 40-minute briefing, and we would also love to meet in person. We'll be talking about the TJ Actions change files breach and how it was detected and the response. In terms of the agenda, we are going to look at introduction to step security, the risks that are associated with third-party GitHub Actions, what is the typical process that enterprises follow for the governance of these third-party actions, and how step security can help simplify this governance process. Now, a lot of enterprises have processes and tools for code security for things like SAST, SCA, secret scanner, and so on, and also tools and processes for cloud security for CSPM and workload protection and so on. But for CI/CD, which is the link between code and cloud, there isn't a lot of process and tools. And is as a result, there are a lot of security incidents that are happening now related to CI/CD. In March, there was a significant incident involving TJ Actions changed files and also the review dog action, where both these actions were compromised, and any organization using those actions were potentially impacted. These actions were then dumping credentials from the runner worker memory and logging them in the build log. There have also been other incidents like the one with Kong, where their GitHub Actions workflow was compromised to exfiltrate credentials that was then used to backdoor an image with Ultralytics, with executals, and so on. And so, as we speak to a lot of enterprises that are trying to secure their GitHub Actions environment, we typically hear of these three problems that I'll cover. The first one is the dilemma of how to secure these third-party GitHub actions. And the reason this becomes a problem is because there are about 25,000 third-party GitHub actions in the marketplace. And developers really want to use these actions to improve productivity. But then a lot of these actions are from single maintainers who are hobby developers, or the actions are abandoned, and this causes security risk. And so the security team is worried that the use of these actions may lead to compromise of the CI/CD credentials, which then have access to the cloud environments or package registries, or it may cause tampering of the builds. And the security team here really doesn't have a good option, because they can either allow the use of these third-party actions and then accept the risk, or they can deny the use of these actions, but then it will hamper developer productivity. In some situations, they also fork these actions to try to reduce the risk, but then that has the effect that it leads to a lot more work in maintaining those actions. The second problem that we hear is about the security and monitoring of the CI/CD runners where these jobs run. And typically, enterprises have security monitoring for their desktops and laptops, and also for their production workload. But they typically don't have any kind of security monitoring for the CI/CD runners, which handle these CI/CD credentials and are producing production builds. And these runners are typically ephemeral, and they have outbound egress access to any destination, which means that attackers can then try and exfiltrate the code or credentials and without too much monitoring and controls in place. The third big problem is the mountain of CI/CD security misconfigurations. There are a lot of best practices that apply to workflow files, such as pinning third-party actions or setting the least privileged token permission. And doing this manually is a lot of effort. And this is a high-level overview of how our platform can help with these problems. In this webinar, we'll be focusing on the top layer for the third-party action security, but I can go through quickly each of the layers and talk about how StepSecurity can help with those three problems. So at the bottom is the CI/CD infrastructure security or the CI/CD runner security. And for this, we have a solution called Hardened Runner, and you can think of it like an EDR solution, which is purpose built for CI/CD runners. And our key differentiator is that it can correlate the network traffic, outbound network traffic, process events, and file write events to each step of the GitHub Actions workflow run. And so it provides the CI/CD context. And then it builds a baseline for each of the jobs. And based on that, you can do anomaly detection and write block policies. And it was Hardened Runner that detected the TJ Actions changed files incident because of an anomalous outbound call. In the middle layer, we have a solution to not only detect misconfigurations in workflow files, but also automatically fix them using automated pull requests. We also now offer workflow run policies, which you can configure to block the workflow runs before they can execute if they don't meet certain criteria. And then finally, at the top, the third-party action security, where you can get an inventory of all the third-party actions, a score for these actions, and also secure drop-in replacements for risky actions. So now let's focus on the top part, which is the risk of these third-party GitHub actions, and try to understand what are the different risks. So to begin with, the first risk is about abandoned actions. A lot of these actions become abandoned, and a lot of them are maintained by single developers and who have written them as a hobby project. And as a result, a lot of times it does not really follow security best practices related to branch protection or running security tools or a secure release process. There are also reliability concerns because if the repository for these third-party actions gets deleted, then any workflow that is using it will stop working. From a security perspective, there are, of course, supply chain risks, as we saw in the TJ Actions change files and review dog incidents, where if an attacker can get write access to this repository, they can actually change the code and then change the tags to point to that malicious code. And then any workflow that is using those actions can potentially get impacted. And so to counter these risks, there are a lot of best practices that are available that are shared by GitHub and available from various different industry best practices. And the first one here is to establish an approved actions list. So GitHub provides a feature where you can set an approved list for actions. And the good thing about this feature is that with this, you get a way to set up a process so that if any new action needs to be used by a developer, they can then request a review of that action because they can't simply start using it because it's not in the allowed list. And that leads to the next best practice is to review the action code and the repository configuration to make sure that it's in good standing before it is approved for use. Forking these repositories is also a best practice, although that can lead to a lot of work in maintaining those forks. Then, of course, when you actually use these third-party actions, the best practice is to pin the action to a specific commit or basically to an immutable tag so that even if the action changes, you are not immediately impacted and you get a chance to review the change before you start using that particular change in the action. And a couple of other best practices are around limiting the GitHub token permission so that even if there is a compromise, that token has minimum permissions. And then to configure dependabot or renovatebot to create pull requests to update these actions so that you get the security fixes and other improved releases. And this is what a typical governance process looks like in enterprises that have set up the allowed list from using the GitHub feature. So now let's say a developer wants to use a new third-party action. They try to use it, but since it's not in the allowed list, the usage will get blocked. And then they would need to reach out to their security team to add that action in the allowed list. And so at this point, the security team would then review the action and follow a certain process around it. At this point, they may realize that this action is in good standing and may approve it, or they may realize that they don't really trust it and they decide to fork that action in a different org or in their own org that they have uh, access to. And once they've taken this decision either to add it or to fork it or to reject the use of that action, they can then communicate this back to the developer, and then the developer can start using it accordingly. Now, as you can see, there are a bunch of issues with this process. The first one being that it is fairly time consuming, both for the developer who needs to wait until that process completes, and for the security team that needs to spend time reviewing and forking these actions. There is also a subjectivity around these reviews. So it may be that two different security engineers do the review and come up with a different assessment about the risk of that action. Then, as I shared earlier, there isn't really a good outcome for the security team because they have to either accept the risk of a risky action or they have to reject it, which will then cause developer friction. And if they do decide to fork it, then it becomes hard to maintain that action going forward. And this is the last slide where I can talk about some of the capabilities that we have to help with this review process and in general, the governance of third-party actions. And then after this, Eremo will give a demo of these features. So the first one here is the GitHub Actions Advisor, which first of all shows you a list of all the different actions that you are using in your organization. And then it gives you a scoring system to objectively score those actions to give you a way to decide whether you want to use that action or you want to reject the use of that action. And when we started with the scoring process, we realized that a lot of the third-party actions had a low score, and as a result, our customers were forking those actions and spending a lot of time maintaining those forks. And so since then, we've introduced StepSecurity maintained actions, which are secure drop-in replacements for these risky actions and are Customers can request onboarding of new actions if they are not already available. And then we go through a stringent process of onboarding these actions and maintaining them in good standing going forward. The next capability is policy-based pull requests, which can be used to pin the actions to a commit SHA and also replace risky actions with the StepSecurity maintained actions automatically through that pull request. And then we have a couple of workflow run policies related to the use of actions. The first one is compromised actions policy. And this is based on our learning from the TJ Actions incident, where even though we became aware that the action is compromised and we communicated it to all our customers, they still had to become aware of that and then go and review the usage of this action in their environment and then disable the workflows that were using it. And all this was time consuming and it was Friday evening. And so learning from that, we now have this compromised actions policy where we maintain a list of compromised actions, and whenever a new one gets compromised, it gets added to this list, and then any workflows that are using that action are automatically blocked. And the other policy is the allowed actions policy, where you can set a list of allowed actions, and this is similar to the GitHub feature. The key difference being that it does not implicitly allow the use of internal actions, which is something that the GitHub feature does. And as a result, it is possible to bypass the review process simply by forking a risky action into your own organization. So that was a high-level overview, and I'll stop sharing, and Elmo, you can start with the demo.
Okay, thank you, Varun. Thank you. So let me share my screen. Awesome. Can you see my screen? Awesome. Thank you so much, Varun, for that awesome presentation. So let's get to the fun part of this webinar, right? The demo, to demo the features that Varun just spoke about. Right, so if you want to follow along with me, the link will be dropped in the chat on how you can start your enterprise, your free enterprise tier. You know, it's free for 14 days, so you can start using this platform free for 14 days just to try out the features that will be demoing today. Right, so we have a bunch of features in StepSecurity, but for today we'll be focusing on just two of these features. Right, so let's begin. So if you have questions as I'm going, please feel free to drop it in the chat and then we would definitely settle them immediately we are done. Awesome. So like Varun said, with our platform, so before StepSecurity uh, brought up this feature for customers for people generally, organizations to know the amount of actions or the kinds of actions on their org, it was very, very stressful, right? It was hard to, find a place where you can know all the actions that exist in your organization. But with our actions governance feature, you can easily see all the actions that exist in your organization. You're not just seeing the actions that exist, you can see the repositories that those actions are, and then you can see the action security score. I know, like Varun rightly said, usually the process for the typical enterprise, of onboarding an action is a dev will meet the security team or a security engineer and we inform that, okay, we want to use this action, and the security engineer, has to analyze that action to ensure that there is no risk. And the problem with this is that two different engineers can have two different verdicts on a particular action, right? But with the action security score, right, there is a standardized criteria that we are using to assess the risk of this action. And that standard is called the Open SSF standard, right? So you can see the name of the actions, their security scores. So let's just go into one of these random actions here, right? I'm going to explain what this maintain action means, later in the demo. Right, so let's look at this action, right? So you can see he has a very low score. So if you open up this action, right, you can see the security score like we spoke about. And like I said, this security score is derived from the OpenSSF scorecard, right? And you can also see the repositories that this action is. Now, what this Step Security platform is not like your common SCA tool, right? Because in your common SCA tools, you cannot see whether the actions are being pinned by the shards or by the tags. And you can't also see the age of those tags, right? For example, you can see that this particular action in this org, action security demo, the tag is currently 2 years old. So it's pretty old, right? And you can actually use Dependabot to automatically update this tag. And to put or upgrade Dependabot configuration in your organization, you can use our feature secure repo. But since we're not talking about that today, we'll just focus on just the actions governance thing. So another thing you can also see is that you can see the network behavior of that particular action, right? You can see all the outbound network calls that particular action can make, right? And so let's assume that an action has a security score. So if we have a maintained action available, you would see it here and you can click on it, right? And you can see the reason why, you can see the difference between the two actions basically. So it's maintained by Step Security. There are no vulnerabilities in this action. Basically we go through a full rigorous process of maintaining these actions to ensure that they stay up to date with best security practices, right? And then is we don't just offer support for node actions, right? We also offer support for containerized actions. So that's Docker actions. So let me show you an action linter. So yeah, we'll do this a containerized action, right? So go to security score. So we also scan container actions for vulnerabilities, and you can see the different vulnerabilities. So let's assume that you want to use this action in your organization. You're pretty worried about these vulnerabilities, and this action currently does not have a maintained action. You can simply come here and request a maintained action. And then when you enter your email address, once we are done onboarding this action, you would see it here under your action requests, and then you can automatically add it to your workflows, right? So I just want to show, a bit of our process, right, of onboarding actions, right? So this is our secure maintenance process, right? So every action basically undergoes a thorough manual code review, before onboarded as a step security maintain action. We usually have a full team that is dedicated to maintaining onboarding actions and maintaining them, ensuring that they reach the standard, right? So there's strict access control, right? There's robust branch protection. There's this tag protection, so you're not scared that the tags can be changed at will if any kind of attack happens, right? Secondly, there's a very secure release process, right? And we have nice release safeguards. We follow industry best practices. That's the OpenSSF standard, pin dependencies in our GitHub Action workflows to specific versions, implement minimal GitHub token permissions. We have proactive vulnerability management, and then we monitor for upstream changes, in the action. And this process really takes like 1 month. So let's say an action gets a new release, in 1 month, within 1 month, we would also, incorporate those changes into the step security maintain action. So you do not have to worry about missing out on the new updates that particular action has, right? So we ensure that all our actions go through comprehensive testing, and then all our actions run with Step Security Harden Runner. So what Step Security Harden Runner is basically a tool for network and runtime security. With that tool, you can observe and analyze network traffic that is going from your runners. Awesome. So let's assume that you wanted to use this feature, right? So there are two scenarios to using this feature. Let's say you want to ensure that every action that you're using in your organization is safe, right? So all you can do is come to the GitHub Actions advisor, right? So let's say you want to check for the score of this particular action, HashiCorp setup Terraform, right? So you see that the score is 9 out of 10, but you're seeing that the branch protection is not so solid, and well, you want to ensure that it's a 10 out of 10. So if there's a maintain action, you can directly use that in your repository. But if we do not have that available currently, you can simply request a maintained action, right? The second scenario is that you already have a couple of risky actions in your workflows, like this actions here that are very low, right? So if we have the maintain action available, you can simply just replace it directly. Or if we do not have a maintain action available, you can also directly request. Right, awesome. So the second thing I'm going to be speaking about today is policy-driven PRs. Right. So let's assume that you have like six different low scoring actions and you wanted to replace them all. So before prior to this, our customers had to manually replace each and every one of these actions, but we came up with policy driven PRs, so you can automatically do this, automatically. So how policy driven PRs works is that it monitors your organization, monitors your repositories, and once it detects security vulnerabilities, it automatically creates a PR based on the settings you set here, right? So currently, you can automatically, like I said, you can automatically pin your actions to full length commit shars, right? You can replace third-party actions with step security maintain actions, right? So you just basically come here and you select all the actions that you want to be replaced in your repository, right? So let's say you had three, let's say you see the team on VS/PR label action, and we are setting it that once it's detected in our workflows, in our, organization, in our repositories, let it be replaced by this particular action, right? And then once that is done, so few minutes, once you do that, in a few minutes, Step Security bot will automatically create this pull request that will replace that low scoring action. So let's look at this particular pull request to see how that pull request look like. Right, so you can say this pull request was created by the Step Security bot, right? And when you look at the change file, you see that prior to this, the action was not pinned to a full length commit SHA, but now it is pinned to a full length commit SHA. You can also see that the risky low scoring action has now been replaced by the step security maintained action automatically, right? So it's this is what we offer, concerning that. So you can automatically replace all your actions, all your low scoring actions with step security maintained actions using this feature. The other thing that Varun spoke about is workflow run policies, right? So workflow run policies they basically allow you to enforce security controls by blocking GitHub action workflow runs that violate policies that you have already defined for your organization, right? And today we'll be looking at just two of those policies because those are the only policies that align with the actions governance that we're speaking about today, we're focused on today. So we have the compromised actions policy, and when Baron was speaking, he spoke about the TG actions incident. So it was a late Friday afternoon. So like most people were already closing, for the day, they were already preparing for the weekend. And that is when the incident happened. So by the way, Step Security, our team was the first to detect the incident using our core tool, Harden Runner. And what is Harden Runner? Harden Runner basically is a tool that provides network and runtime security. We'll probably talk more about this in a later webinar. But Harden Runner detected, the incident, and then immediately we tried to get in touch with some of our enterprise customers. Some of them were able to get in touch with them, but some of them we were not able to get in touch with them, and it took them quite a while to recover from the TG Actions incident. So because of that, we decided to think of a way that we can automatically protect our customers in case things like this happen, right? And we came up with the compromised actions policy, right? So what this policy does is that we maintain an internal list in our organization of already compromised actions. So once we detect and find out that an action is compromised, we immediately add it to that list. And once it's added to that list, every workflow run that has that action will be blocked immediately by Step Security bot, right? So all you just need to do is just press create, add the policy name, select compromised action policy, set it to enforce so that it's blocked, right? And then select the repositories that you want this to apply to. So you can select, the important repositories that it apply to. So once that happens, let me show you how this will look. Just demo this to you. So let me show you what the workflow file looks like. So let's assume, so we have right now in the list, there's just one action. because it's a dummy compromise action. So let's assume that this was TG actions on that particular day, and we had added TG actions, to the list of compromise actions. Once I try to run this workflow, sorry. Once I try to run this workflow, in a moment, you will see what will happen. So you see that the run was cancelled. So it could not even run. So if, let's say, there was an actual compromise action, your credentials, your secrets will be safe because the workflow will never run in the first place. And if workflow does not run, you can't be, your secrets can be exfiltrated. You're still safe, right? And if this happens, you can easily view what happened on the policy evaluation dashboard. So you see that we just ran this, and the reason why it failed was because compromised actions were detected. And if you click on this, you will see the compromised action that was detected. So this feature is so important because we know that in the future, as more of these supply chain attacks happen, our customers will be protected directly, without even their knowledge. They'll be protected from having such kind of issues. Right. The second policy that we'll be talking about is the allowed action policy, right? So like Varun said, currently this policy is GitHub has a very similar feature to this, right? But the difference between what GitHub has and what we have is that first of all, if a developer forks an action into a repo into the organization, GitHub will automatically assume that it's part of the internal list. But with the allowed actions policy, that particular action will still be blocked, right? And the second thing is that for GitHub, it is organization based, so you can't specify allow list for certain repositories, right? But with our allowed actions policy, you can specify um, allow list for certain repositories, right? So how you use it is that you can directly add the actions here, or you can go here and see all the actions in your organization and directly pick it from here, or you can even um, add by repository, right? Awesome. So I already have an allowed list here, and I have added it to this run policy demo, right? So only these actions are going to be allowed, and any action that is not here, the workflow run will be blocked. So let's see this in action. Oh, okay, no, this is it. Yeah. Okay. Please, if you have questions, please feel free to drop them in the comments. So let me just show you the workflow file. So in this workflow file, we have, an allowed action. So we've allowed these two actions, but you can see that this is an internal action. So usually if you're using the GitHub feature, this action would run because it was forked into the repository, into the organization, right? But if you run this, for us, it is going to be cancelled. Awesome. So you see that this has been cancelled. The run was cancelled. And if you go to your policy evaluation dashboard, okay, let me just refresh this. Okay. You can see that the reason why it was cancelled was because we are using unapproved actions, and you can see the list of those actions that were unapproved, right? So with these features, you can simplify action governance in your organization. And I'm sure that once you try these features out for yourself, you would see how easy things will be to secure your organization from supply chain attacks through third-party GitHub Actions. So, any questions? Screen.
Thanks, Eremo. So in case you have any more questions, please do add them to the Q&A. And so one of the question is that does it cancel the whole workflow when it encounters even on uh, unallowed action step? And that's true. And that's largely because the API that GitHub provides to cancel a particular run is to cancel a workflow run. And so we use that API to cancel the workflow run. Okay. And if you had any other questions, please let us know. For one of the earlier question around do you take control of the public actions, we've also shared the process that LMO went through. And so that's a documented process that we follow to onboard these actions and then update them if there's a new release in the upstream. And you can also see the current list of maintained actions. Okay, so there is another question, which is how effective is step security in maintaining third-party actions and how do we request support for actions not found? So in terms of effective, I can, talk about the SL. So we have in terms of effective, I think maybe you can refer to the process, but I can also quickly walk through the process, right? So when we get a request to onboard an action, and so this is part of the second part of the question that you can request onboarding through the dashboard or through the API. And when you request onboarding of a new action, our team gets notified and then they go through the process to onboard it. We typically onboard any action which is not from GitHub. And if we are in a position to onboard it, there have been some cases where the source code for that action was not available, or one of the dependencies was such that it was not open sourced, so we could not build it. And in such cases, we cannot onboard it. But in all other cases, we onboard the action and we have an SLA of 2 business days per action per customer to onboard it. And in terms of effectiveness, like I mentioned earlier, we follow this process where it goes through a manual code review before we onboard it. The repository is set up, and we have a lot of automation to set up the repository and to fix vulnerabilities and to become aware if there's an upstream change. So once the repository is set up, we set up as part of that branch protection rules, which requires approval from at least one other person other than the one who's making the change, and set up tools to run as part of that pull request process. And then as part of the release process, we rebuild the action from source, rebuild the dist folder again, compare that with the build on a GitHub Actions workflow to make sure that it is as expected. If it's a Docker action, then we build a Docker image which gets pushed to our container registry. And then we have automation to monitor for vulnerabilities, to monitor for new releases, and then this whole process repeats to release a new version for the action. I hope that answers your question, and if you had any follow-up questions on that, let us know. Yeah, so in scenarios where there is a licensing issue or there is a scenario where the action source code is not available, then we have a process where you can see that output on your dashboard and you'll get notified about that. We haven't actually seen a licensing guardrail so far, but we have seen a couple of cases where it there was the source code for the action was not available, it just had the dist folder, and based on that, we could not onboard it. There have also been cases where we have recommended to our customers that they do not use certain actions because they can allow, for example, bypassing the review process. So there are certain actions that will simply load another action and start running that. And so there have been cases where we've recommended not onboarding that. And so if we are unable to onboard, then it becomes available on the dashboard. Status changes. There are also cases where we may recommend an alternative. And so that becomes available through the dashboard and also through notification. So the next question is, how about your security checkboxes conflicting with GitHub's checkboxes that our enterprise admin might have set or enforced? And I think this is referring to the allow list. And in this case, basically the the actions used will be blocked if either of the GitHub allow list or the step security allow list is is not met. So let's say there is an action which is not allowed by the GitHub allow list that will immediately uh, and so just to complete on that, in that case, it would get blocked by GitHub. But if it is allowed in there and not allowed in the step security allow list, then it will get blocked there. And in general, in terms of the settings, I mean, so other than the workflow run policies, the other places that we integrate with GitHub are to create a pull request. And that's just a normal pull request, and that typically would not have a conflict. And we also support GitHub checks for certain features. So there is not really uh, scenario of having conflicts other than in the workflow run policies. So, so the way developers interact with our platform is either they see a pull request come in, which is fixing some of the misconfigurations, or they see a workflow run getting blocked, or they can also enable GitHub checks to see some of the findings within the GitHub UI. And so, like I mentioned, for the pull request and the GitHub checks, there isn't really a conflict. And with the workflow run policies, for the action policy in particular, it has to be allowed by both GitHub and the step security allow list. Um, yeah, and I hope that answers your question. But if you had a specific other scenario, do let us know. Okay, so if there are no more questions, we can go ahead and close this webinar. Thanks again for attending. Thank you.
Thank you. See you later.